Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to help you process a whole stack of information and turn it into insights you can actually use to get you informed quickly and thoroughly.
Exactly.
Today, we're really digging into Module 11, the focus. Politics, power, and protest. We'll be trying to unravel how power works in society, how different political systems function.
And importantly, how regular people like us organize. Sometimes to challenge things, sometimes to keep them the same.
Absolutely. Our main guide for this is going to be excerpts from the Manifesto of the Communist Party, plus some other key readings from the module.
Yeah.
Our goal here is really just to make these big ideas feel, well, maybe entertaining, relevant, definitely, and clear. Especially if sociology or political theory is kind of new to you.
Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah, let's unpack this.
What's so interesting, I think, is how these older texts can really help us connect these abstract theories of power to stuff we see every single day.
Right.
From way back in industrial times to digital spaces now, even in families or our communities. So yeah, we'll be looking at how ideas like class struggle actually show up and the role of social movements.
And technology too, right? That's huge now.
Oh, absolutely. How tech is reshaping politics. It all kind of leads back to a big question for you, the listener. What does power actually mean in your own life? How do you feel its effects?
Yeah, that's the core of it. So let's jump right into that concept you mentioned, one that sounds maybe a bit academic, but is super relevant.
Yeah.
Class struggle. The Manifesto hits you right away with the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. That's quite a statement.
It really is.
So what does that actually mean in everyday terms? How does class struggle show up if you're a student, maybe, or at work, or just looking for a place to live?
Okay, yeah, good question. The Manifesto basically paints this picture of society split between oppressing and oppressed classes.
Right.
Marx and Engels focus on the bourgeoisie, those who own the factories, the land, the capital, the means of production, and then the proletariat, the workers, who basically only have their ability to work, their labor power, to sell just to get by. But it's not just some dusty old idea about factories. It's really about who's got the control, who's getting the biggest slice of the pie, and who's kind of left fighting for basics.
So how does that translate today?
Well, think about student life. Maybe it's the fight over tuition fees, right? Or who gets access to the best resources, internships, things like that. Does the cost of education create a divide?
Yeah, you can definitely see that.
Or at work, it's that classic dynamic, isn't it? Employer versus employee. Are people being paid fairly for the value they're creating?
Or are wages stuck while profits go up?
Exactly. The Manifesto talks about this surplus value, the value workers create beyond their wages, which the owners capture. It's not just about having a bad boss. It's presented as a systemic thing built into how capitalism works.
And housing?
Oh, housing is a stark one. You see a relatively small number of people, maybe big developers or landlords, having huge control over something essential.
While loads of people struggle to find somewhere affordable, somewhere stable.
Right. That struggle over basic needs, over living conditions, that's definitely a modern version of what they called class antagonism.
That really grounds it.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we follow that logic from the Manifesto, Marx and Engels are basically saying history isn't just random stuff happening.
Right.
It's this constant ongoing conflict between these groups, these classes. They even say the bourgeoisie cannot exist without continually revolutionizing the instruments of production. And that changes everything else, like social relations too. That's a pretty bold claim.
It is a very strong claim.
Do you see history that way, as fundamentally about class conflict? And where do we see that constant revolution and uninterrupted disturbance today? Not just in factories, but everywhere.
It's a powerful lens for sure. The argument isn't so much about individuals fighting, but about this deep tension built right into the economic system. The idea is that the capitalist class has to keep shaking things up, new tech, new markets, new ways of organizing work, just to stay ahead and keep growing their capital.
Which leads to
uninterrupted disturbance. Everlasting uncertainty and agitation, as they put it. It's dynamic. It's always changing, never really settles.
So do you buy it completely?
Well, it's definitely compelling. And you absolutely see echoes of that constant revolution today, often with really disruptive effects on society.
Like what?
Think about the gig economy. That completely changed work for millions, right? offered flexibility maybe, but often took away security, benefits. That's a huge shift in the relations of production.
Yeah, man.
For AI right now. It's disrupting whole industries, creating massive wealth for some, but also real anxiety and uncertainty for many others about their jobs, their futures. And look at that source we read, the algorithmic rise of the alt-right. It makes this argument that maybe the way some social media platforms work, their algorithms actually help extreme views spread. It calls it a potential feature, not just a bug. Now, that source doesn't use the exact term class struggle, but it really shows how new technologies, new platforms become part of these ongoing power struggles.
Reshaping things.
Yeah, accelerating social change, maybe concentrating influence in new hands. The Manifesto said the bourgeoisie creates a world in its own image. You could argue tech companies are doing something similar today, shaping our social world, our politics, for good and bad.
That's a really sharp connection. It shows how these basic dynamics, power, competition, change, are still playing out, just maybe in different ways.
Exactly.
So, okay, if history is kind of driven by these conflicts and constant changes, where do social movements come in? How can groups of people actually push back or change the direction of political power?
Yeah.
What makes some movements catch fire and succeed while others just fizzle out?
Well, social movements are basically the response, right? They bubble up from those very areas of conflict and tension.
Makes sense.
The Manifesto talks about the workers' counter-struggle, starting small, then getting organized. It's not just one person complaining, it's about collective action.
So what does it take for them to actually work?
Usually a mix of things. You need a clear reason people are unhappy, something unifying. You need organization, structure. Good leadership helps, definitely. The ability to get lots of people involved, mobilized, and sometimes just seizing the right moment, when the powers that be seem a bit shaky or vulnerable.
Right.
The Manifesto emphasizes this idea of the ever-expanding union of the workers. It suggests the real win isn't always just the immediate demand, like a pay raise, but building that collective power over time.
So it's about more than just tweaking things.
Often, yes. Movements might start with specific reforms, but the goal, at least in the Manifesto's view, could be much bigger, fundamentally changing society, aiming for the abolition of the class struggle itself.
We see that today too, right, in different movements.
Absolutely. Think about labor unions fighting for contracts, or climate activists demanding systemic changes to energy policy, or civil rights groups pushing for equality. They're all organizing to challenge existing power structures, sometimes demanding pretty fundamental shifts.
What makes them last?
Often it's that sustained pressure, keeping the issue alive, building broad support, and crucially, offering a vision of how things could be different.
That connects perfectly to something else crucial today: technology. Especially social media. How is that shaping politics and protests now? We see it bringing people together, but also maybe driving them apart.
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword. Our own course material asks that directly. Is social media a force for democracy or demagoguery?
Good question.
On one side, it can be amazing for democracy, right? It makes activism easier to get into.
Yeah, lower the bar.
Movements can share info instantly, organize protests online, give a platform to voices that might otherwise be ignored. People miles apart can connect over a shared cause. Think about hashtags going viral, online petitions.
Huge reach.
Huge reach. But then there's the other side. That algorithmic rise of the alt-right piece really hits hard on the potential for demagoguery.
How so?
It argues that for some groups, like white nationalists, these platforms are almost perfectly designed, suited for spreading their message quickly, maybe even dangerously so.
Wow. Suited, not just accidental.
That's the argument, that the design itself, the algorithms pushing for engagement, clicks, reactions, might end up amplifying extreme divisive stuff.
Because that gets engagement.
Potentially, yeah. It can create echo chambers where you only hear stuff you agree with, makes misinformation spread like wildfire. It can become a place for radicalization, making society more polarized, not less.
So it mobilizes, but also distorts.
Exactly. Mobilizes incredibly fast, but also concentrates the control of information with a few big companies and can seriously warp public conversation. It's a huge factor in how power is contested now.
That's a really vital point, how the platform's design isn't neutral. Okay, so this whole discussion about power, who has it, how they use it, how it affects us, it brings us to government itself. Our readings touch on how power is supposed to be divided and used in systems like the U.S. government, electing people, checks and balances, all that.
Right.
But considering everything we've talked about, class struggle, big money influence, social media shaping things, is democracy actually, like, working the way it's meant to? How do these ideas help us evaluate politics today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And our course materials really lean into it, asking things like, why is voter turnout so low? Or is U.S. democracy in trouble? It even introduces this concept of a legitimation crisis.
What's that?
Basically, it's when a political system starts to fail because people lose faith in it, they don't feel committed, they don't feel involved, they don't think it's legitimate anymore.
That sounds serious.
It is. And the Manifesto, again, offers a pretty critical historical perspective here. It argues that, essentially, the modern state acts like a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie.
Meaning it serves the powerful economic interests.
That's the argument. That even in a democracy, the system might end up primarily benefiting the dominant economic class, rather than truly representing everyone equally.
So when people are cynical about politics, or don't vote,
it could be a sign they feel the system isn't working for them, which lines up with that idea of a legitimation crisis. Yeah. And think about how state power directly hits people's lives. That reading of Love and Papers was fascinating.
About immigration policies.
Exactly. It shows how these laws actually constrain family formation for young, undocumented adults. They affect who people date, how relationships develop, even how they act as partners or parents.
That's incredibly personal.
It is. It's the state reaching deep into personal life based on immigration status. And that forces you to ask really hard questions about fairness, equality, justice within the democratic system itself. Who does this democracy truly serve? Is it serving everyone?
Yeah, it's a powerful example of how policy isn't abstract. Okay, wow. We've covered a serious amount of ground.
Do we really have?
From those foundational ideas of class struggle in the Manifesto, seeing conflict as a driver of history.
Right.
To how social movements rise up to challenge power structures. And then diving into the really complex role of technology, especially social media, as this new kind of battleground.
Both empowering and potentially dangerous.
Exactly. And wrapping up with these tough, vital questions about democracy itself. Is it working? Is it facing this legitimation crisis?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is that power isn't just, in Washington, D.C. or in formal politics.
It's everywhere.
It's woven into our economy, how we relate to each other socially, the tech we use every single day. That Manifesto idea of constant change, constant tension, it really pushes you to look beyond the surface.
Question assumptions.
Yeah. Who's benefiting? Who's maybe getting left behind or bearing the costs? It encourages that critical thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And hopefully understanding these dynamics helps you make a bit more sense of the world swirling around you. We've looked at how power shapes lives, historically and right now. So the final thought really is for you listening. What stands out to you from all this?
Yeah.
Where do you see these forces, power, conflict, protest, technology, playing out in your own community?
Yeah.
On your campus? Even just scrolling through your phone?
And what does noticing that mean for how you might engage with it all? Something to definitely chew on.